All right, episode 5 of Just a Guy on the Couch rambling on about college football. This is the sixth and seventh game for whatever the bye week falls on. So it'll be the sixth and seventh game for these teams. It's been an exciting start of the season. And yeah, college football in general, every season is exciting, but there's been close games with some of the teams at the top. We had the close call for Alabama, and let's be honest, if Quinn Ewers doesn't go down for Texas in that game, he was shredding the Alabama defense in that game. So Alabama was fortunate to come away with that win. And then last week, Texas A&M did everything they could basically to give that game away. Texas A&M had every opportunity, and it just seemed like they made mistakes and penalties and just kept shooting themselves in the foot. And just man, some of it was bad coaching as well in that game. And Alabama comes away with a win there. And obviously their quarterback's been injured, but Alabama's got enough talent to overcome that for the most part. You had the wild game in Columbia, Missouri, where Georgia somehow barely escaped. So we've had some close calls with teams at the top. You also had the wild shootout, Clemson and Wake Forest. Is a high scoring game. Wake Forest in that game really could have put it away. They should have won that game, to be honest with you. But championship teams or teams at the top, surviving is what it's all about. And sometimes that's the difference between some of these programs that have been in the playoffs year after year or contending for the playoffs and some of the programs right now that they've just been kind of mediocre and they are close. Some of them are talented and they just can't get over the top. Surviving those type of games is going to be the difference. Let's look at this week. So let's look at noon, and I hope everybody's fall is going well. I'm gonna side note here. Hope everybody's fall is going well. If you're a Oklahoma fan, I know it's been tough. Michigan State fan, it's been tough, but hope your fall is going well. So let's look at this week coming up. You're ready to watch some games. You're at home or maybe you're at a game, but games to keep an eye on here. Penn State travels to Ann Arbor to play Michigan. Both teams are undefeated. It's a big Big Ten East game. If you lose this game, chances of going to Indy are going to be really slim. You're going to have to take down the giant of Ohio State for sure if you lose this game. You're probably going to have to anyways, but this is a huge game. Auburn is going to Oxford to play Ole Miss. And this isn't necessarily a big game as far as these teams, but it's a huge game. Is Brian Harsin on his way out? I mean, the fans, they don't seem to like him very much. And then when you're 3-3 and you're not playing good football, it's just a bad look. And Lane Kiffin has his team playing really well, and they're at 6-0. And we all know how Lane Kiffin definitely doesn't hold back. This game, if Ole Miss starts to get the momentum and get that firepower going, it could be ugly because Lane's not going to hold back. Also, noon, I'm talking about Eastern time here because some of these games are going to be 11 a.m. depending on the Central Time Zone. But Kansas goes to Norman. Oklahoma is coming off an absolutely horrific loss to Texas in that rivalry game. But Kansas, although they've been kind of the story of college football to start the season, their quarterback is injured and going to Norman. You would think Oklahoma still has enough talent and being at home to win this game. I think it's a hard game to kind of predict there. Iowa State, who is somewhat struggling, although their losses have been close. Speaking of Iowa State, did Matt Campbell? Matt Campbell was the hot name. A lot of fan bases that didn't have coaches. There were people that, they should go after Matt Campbell. They want Matt Campbell. Is the iron still hot for that guy as far as the perception around the country? Iowa State just hasn't got over the hump. They haven't really turned the corner. He seems like a great dude, and he seems perfectly content to stay at Iowa State. But you're going to have to even win there too, even though the expectations aren't that high. They're going to Austin, which is a tough place to play. Texas is really good. I have not heard if Quinn Ewers is back. If Ewers is back, then the game could be ugly. I think Texas wins. They're favored big, actually. The Big Ten game, Minnesota goes to Champaign to play Illinois. Ibrahim is back for Minnesota, is what I heard. He's back. That makes a huge difference because Minnesota just looks terrible without him. Illinois has been playing really well, but they haven't necessarily played high-powered offenses. I would say Indiana is their best offense they've played, and that's not necessarily saying a whole lot. So I'm going to kind of skip ahead to the 3:30 game, the big 3:30 game that the entire country is going to be talking about. Bama is going to Knoxville. I think this game is really hard to figure out. Alabama has won 15 straight in this streak. And this is a rivalry where, even though it's across the divisions, East and West, they play every year because it's a traditional rivalry. You know that Tennessee has one of the biggest and loudest crowds when they're at home. That should play a factor. No matter what, it's going to be such a fun, exciting, anticipated game. If you were a Tennessee fan and you were going to the game, even if you're not going to the game, but especially if the people down there that are going to the game, just imagine it's Thursday right now. I don't know how you even stay focused. You're going to be so excited. You're going to be like, okay, it's Friday evening here so that we can get to that game on Saturday. It's going to be just a crazy crowd. It's going to be loud. It's got to be, I'm sure it's got to be a CBS game, obviously. Yeah. And all those SEC fans, they complain about the broadcasters, which kind of gets old. I don't care. CBS, I think CBS does a pretty good job with their coverage. And here's what you always ask. Is Tennessee back? And we've seen it so many times. And they've been somewhat mediocre for a long time. And there's always so much hype about Tennessee because generally they have a lot of talent, huge, crazy fan base, one of the biggest stadiums in the country. Might actually be, so if you look at big stadiums, Michigan, Tennessee, Penn State, those are three of the biggest. But Alabama there's just something about Alabama and Nick Saban where you get to these big games where a program that maybe hasn't won one of these huge games and it's so hyped and they're looking for the upset because no matter how good Tennessee might be or whoever else is trying to beat Alabama in a home game in their own stadium where they've got their crowd and they're trying to upset Alabama. You always have to think that they're just made for these games. And somehow Nick Saban just pulls it together when you think that it's not. But Alabama has shown a lot of vulnerability this year. They've survived. They could have 2 losses very easily, but they have been in these situations, and their program is so built for this that it's hard to pick against them, really. And so this is going to be the game where it's like, is Tennessee for real? And also in these games, is Tennessee going to come out and, is Josh Heupel going to be able to, okay, don't get too hyped, guys, because these guys are going to be, are they going to be able to just kind of stay level-headed in this huge game at home? It's going to be hyped. But Tennessee looks really good, and I actually believe in Tennessee right now. I really do, which is not usual. But Tennessee's barely survived at Pitt, which Pitt's a hard team to figure out. I don't think that Pitt's really good, and in Tennessee they got by Florida just barely. Now they did go to Baton Rouge and destroyed LSU, which anytime that Brian Kelly loses, it makes me happy, that's for sure. I cannot stand Brian Kelly. So that's going to be a 3:30 game. I am incredibly excited to watch that game. Now, depending on how the Michigan Penn State game goes, might determine my mood heading into that 3:30 game. If Michigan wins that noon game, I'm going to be extremely excited, and I'll be really excited to turn on that Tennessee game, hoping for that upset over Alabama. But if Michigan loses, it might put a little damper on things. But we'll see. Other games, Big 12 game, Oklahoma State goes to Fort Worth against TCU. That could be a real shootout. It really could. It's a hard game to figure out, and it's kind of one of those usual traditional Big 12 games where the teams are so evenly matched. They really are. Syracuse is undefeated. They're at home against NC State, which NC State's another team that's hard to figure out. Syracuse is undefeated, but I haven't seen necessarily who they've played. They're going to be in that dome. I would favor Syracuse a little bit. I'm not as big of a believer in NC State as maybe what their ranking is. Now here's a game that intrigues me. It's not a huge game that maybe people are going to be paying attention to around the country, but Arkansas goes to BYU. This is a big game for Sam Pittman, and I've said it before the season started. I'm a huge fan of Sam Pittman, and I like the way that Arkansas plays. But they have not necessarily, and I know their schedule is tough, but they are only 3-3, and this is a huge game though for them, huge game for their program, because they had so much momentum coming from last year and excitement, expectations at Arkansas once again, and it's been a long time since we've seen that. So this is a big game, and it's non-conference, but it's a big game for the Arkansas program, I think, to get that momentum back. If they can go out to Provo and beat BYU, that's gonna be a big win for them moving forward. And I know they've had some injuries, like most teams have, but still. A night game, Clemson goes to Doak at night. You know it's going to be loud. Florida State, um, ah, again, I feel like we say this every year for the past, 6 seasons or whatever. They're just hard to figure out. Um, if they protect Travis, I think could be a big game. Um, at night, Doak is really loud, and so this will be a huge game. Florida State is coming off losses to NC State and Wake Forest, which are good teams, but still, again, it's that inconsistency from the Noles that we've seen. So this is going to be a huge game for Florida State and a huge game for the country if Florida State can pull off this. I call it upset. I still call it upset because Clemson's undefeated and ranked really high. On the flip side, Clemson has beat Wake Forest, North Carolina State. I thought they dominated the North Carolina State game, and they barely squeaked by the Wake Forest game. Wake Forest had every opportunity to win that game and actually should have won that game in a lot of ways, but Clemson survived. Again, it's that championship program type of mentality where you survive those games. And I believe it was in Winston-Salem. Mississippi State goes to Lexington to play Kentucky. A Kentucky team that had really high expectations. They've lost 2 games. What do they call their stadium is sponsored by Kroger, I believe. They have a really good home crowd. We'll see what Mike Leach dials up. Mississippi State has obviously a really good offense with, and that's just a staple of Mike Leach for the most part. Now they did lose in Baton Rouge, but they're coming off 2 wins where they scored 40 points against Arkansas, 42 against Texas A&M. So they're rolling. So is that home crowd for Kentucky going to make the difference? And we'll see what funny things that Mike Leach might come up with. He's just golden with those post game interviews. He's a unique character. I like that guy. Out west, USC is going to Utah. I've been high on USC for the entire season. They have a lot of talent, and some of it came over with Lincoln Riley when he came from Oklahoma. Very talented team. I think their offense, although they've had some close games at Oregon State, and I thought the Washington State game was closer than what maybe the final score. Washington State played really, really good in the first half. They just couldn't quite get over that hump. And then I thought the game was actually pretty close. And, USC just kind of pulled away. Just at that point, it's just talent. It comes down to talent, speed, and all that. The USC defense is actually pretty good. And so they're even though it's going to be in Salt Lake City, it's still going to be a really tough game for Utah to win. I'm anxious to see because Utah's been kind of up and down. You know, they had the game where they went to Florida and they lost in a close game that they very could have won. And then they went to Pasadena and lost to UCLA in a high-scoring game last week. That's going to be an evening game for people in the East Coast. So, and out in the Pac-12, staying out in the Pac-12, you've got a night game of Wazoo and Oregon State. I know it's not going to draw a lot of interest, but it could be fun, could be exciting. That kind of rounds out the week here. Yeah, like I said, it's been a fun and exciting season. My Saturday mornings have kind of changed a little bit because I used to be diehard ESPN Game Day, and I'll still have it on, but I've become a big fan also of the Big Noon Kickoff on or the whatever the Fox show is, and that's been fun, and also kind of a different angle. The Michigan football, I don't know what you want to call it, media broadcasting, whatever you want to call it. They do a cool thing. It's called Behind the Mic on YouTube. And so the pre-games before the Michigan home games, they'll basically have cameras inside the broadcasting booth up in the press box. And you get to watch and listen, and pretty much kind of it feels like you're there in the press box as the radio broadcast pregame, like what is it, like 3 or 4 hours early, and they start and they talk about the games, and you get to watch some of the broadcasters that are preparing for the game. And it's just I'm kind of a broadcasting nerd. You grow up on guys like Keith Jackson, and then ESPN Game Day with Corso back when he was in his prime. You had Jackson and Greasy, and for whatever people think about Musburger, as a kid, his voice just reminds me of Saturdays in the fall. So people can have mixed opinions. I think people are too critical sometimes on broadcasters. They don't realize how hard it would be to just sit and analyze and talk about a game in real time as it's going on without making mistakes, without saying something wrong, without cursing. And when you look back on classic games, that's the voice that you're going to hear. A big play, you're going to hear whoever was broadcasting. Maybe it was Nestler, and there's so many broadcasters that I'm through the years I grew up on, and you hear their voice, and it's just was it Tim? I think Tim Brando used to do games too. I think he still does games sometimes. But anyways, yeah, I hope your fall is going well. I didn't mention, real quick, get back to the Big Ten. I did not mention Wisconsin coming to East Lansing. I say coming because I'm just a few miles away from the stadium to take on Michigan State. Michigan State has obviously struggled. Everybody is, what do you want to say? It's just, it's kind of low-hanging fruit for everybody to be negative and critical. They have not played very well this year, obviously. How is Jim Leonhard? What is this? This is maybe his second game as a Wisconsin coach. They destroyed Northwestern last week, but it was Northwestern. So they're going to come to East Lansing. This might be a winnable game for Michigan State, which isn't something that people have said in a while. And since, I would say, the non-conference schedule. But we'll see how that goes. I hope that your Saturday turns out good. Whatever you're watching, whatever you're doing, if you're going to a game, whatever team you're a fan of, I hope your fall is going well. And hopefully I'll get back again next week. I haven't really kept up on these podcasts as much as I wanted to, but, life's busy. Anyways, have a good day until next time.